chapter 21. I'm reading from the English Standard Version. The scripture will be on the screen. You can also find it on your device. I believe we're in week 5 of this series, Choose Wisely, and I pray it's been impactful and helpful for you on your journey. Luke chapter 21, I'm going to begin reading at verse 1. Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box. And he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. And he said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For they have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on." You may be seated in the presence of the living God. Allow me to take this text on today. That says a lot about you. That says a lot about you. One thing I need you to know and understand, every choice you make says something about you. Every choice you make is just a small window often into your character, your personality, your faith, or even your belief. Your choices you make show us something about you and begin to create a narrative for your life. And consistent choices begin to paint an even better picture of who you are. So it's important that when you make choices, you choose wisely because they say a lot about you. Jalen Brunson is the point guard for the New York Knicks. A couple weeks ago, I watched an interview of him, and Jalen recalls when he was in 9th grade, his parents coming to him and saying basically this: you could be a good basketball player or a good student and have a good social life, but you only can choose 2 of them. You can have any 3 you want, but you only get to choose 2 of them. So Jalen said as a 9th grader, he made the choice to be a good basketball player and a good student. He goes on to say how pretty much throughout his high school career, he didn't have much of a social life. His friends were the people who played on his basketball team, or the people he hung out with were the people who played AAU or worked out with them. He didn't have much of a social life because his parents told him he had to choose what he really wanted. In that moment, Jalen may have not described it like this, but in that moment, Jalen had to choose his sacrifice. By choosing to be a good basketball player and a good student, he chose to sacrifice his social life. It could have been a different way. He could have chose to have a good social life and be a good basketball player and sacrifice being a good student, or he could have chose to be a good student and have a social life and sacrifice being a good basketball player. He had to make a choice, and he had to choose his sacrifice. This is my big idea that I have for you today. I need you to understand this. Anything worth having and anything worth becoming will require a level of sacrifice. Let me read that again. I could probably stop right here. Anything worth having and anything worth becoming will require a level of sacrifice. You will have to sacrifice something. And the choices you make should reflect the things you are willing to sacrifice for the sake of what you want to do or what you want to become. If you want joy in your life, there's some things you may have to sacrifice. If you want more peace in your life, there's even things you have to sacrifice. If you want more money, you may have to sacrifice some things. If you want to spend more time with your family, there's some things you may have to sacrifice. If you want to live in a certain neighborhood, in a certain size house, there may be some things you have to sacrifice for a season, because anything worth having and anything worth becoming will require a level of sacrifice. Even as it relates to becoming who God has created you to be, it will require you to sacrifice something. And today I challenge you and I wonder, are you willing to choose sacrifice? Like, to make the conscious decision to choose sacrifice. A lot of us end up sacrificing something because of decisions we made, but I think for us to get to where we want to be or to obtain what we want, to get there faster, we need to be intentional about literally choosing to sacrifice. And when we look at Luke chapter 21, Jesus narrates this scene of this woman who chooses sacrifice. And the scripture paints this picture and says a lot about her. David, what does the scripture say about her? The first thing that I believe says about her and says about us, when you choose to sacrifice, it says what you're committed to. The temple was surrounded with these, we would call them collection baskets. But no, in this day, they looked like basins with this narrow opening, and people would come and drop in their offering. Some of them, this particular temple, this woman Jesus is at in this particular, has 13 of these are surrounding the temple. Some of them are actually for people to come pay their taxes. But then some of them are for people to give an offering. And Jesus is here and watching this scene, and Jesus points out some obvious things. One, he's observing how rich people and poor people are doing the same thing in a sense. When I read that, one thing I had to think about is that it's important that we are mindful when people show up to church. We may show up and do the same exact thing, but it may be coming from a different place. We may be singing the same songs. We may be clapping on the same beat. We may be singing and rejoicing and fellowshipping together, but you don't always know what it took for someone to show up on a day. You don't always know what happened prior to them getting here. You don't always know the ups and the downs that people may have had to fight through to show up. So it's important as a body of believers and as a family this year, especially as we're talking about being connected, to be sensitive to one another when we show up here. Because you don't know what it costs people to show up on a Sunday. Jesus is watching these people give offering, and he points out this widow woman. Jesus is descriptive in his talk of her. He says she's a widow woman and she's poor. You have to understand, in this culture, most women's wealth was tied to their husband. And usually, if a woman was a widow, unless someone else claimed her, she really didn't have a regular income. She would have to sell things or do things in order to make money. It really wasn't any way for her to be upwardly mobile. Her husband apparently didn't leave her any inheritance or anything of that nature, because now she's at a place that she's poor and she's a widow, but yet she still chooses to give. She makes this sacrifice to give what she has, and the choice she makes to sacrifice lets us know what she is committed to. The very things you're willing to sacrifice for, it tells us what you're committed to. If you're not willing to sacrifice for something, it's obvious you may not be truly committed to it. Because often your commitment to anything requires a level of sacrifice. Your commitment to your family requires a level of sacrifice. Your commitment to your job requires a level of sacrifice. Your commitment to your health, requires a level of sacrifice. Your commitment even to the things of God will require a level of sacrifice. And whenever you make the choice to sacrifice for something, it lets us know what you are committed to, because sacrifice begins to reveal to us your heart. Your willingness to make those sacrifices lets other people know how you really feel about something. Because a lot of people are committed to things all the way up until the point where they're forced to make a sacrifice. God, I'll do it as long as it don't cost me anything. God, you can use me as long as I can still have the plan that I have for my life. God, whatever it is you want me to do, God, I'm willing to do it. I'll serve. I'll go as long as it doesn't interrupt what I have planned. If you want to know how committed somebody is to you, put them in a position to have to sacrifice for the sake of your relationship. And your willingness to choose to sacrifice reveals to us what you're committed to. She didn't have much, but yet she was giving. You have to understand about offering. An offering was a free will offering. I told you in the description, with the introduction of the sermon, some of these containers were to pay your taxes. That's what you were obligated to do as a citizen to do. But offering was a free will thing. It was up to her. She was not obligated to do it. But for some reason, even though considering her situation, she still did it because she was committed to giving. She was committed to giving. She was committed to giving. And even if it was her last, she still was willing to do it. Why? Because she was willing to choose sacrifice. Because she was committed to it. But what else does it say about you? First, when you choose sacrifice, it says what you're committed to. Secondly, when I choose sacrifice, it signifies what you think is worth it. My commitment shows what I think about a thing. And what you sacrifice for greatest is probably what you love the most. When I'm willing to sacrifice it for some reason, I believe it's worth it. It's worth me giving up something. It's worth me putting myself in a seemingly bad situation. It's worth it. She thought it was worth it for her, and it was meaningful, and it had value for her to be a giver. And because she thought it was worth it, she was willing to make a sacrifice. When I could declare something worth it and valuable, I'll make the sacrifice. But if I don't see value in a thing, or if I don't think something's that worth it, it's really up to my convenience. It's really up to whether or not I'm available. I'm not going to go out my way for something that I don't find value in. But when I see value in something, I'm willing to do what it takes to pursue it. That's when I see value in it. When I see something's important, I'll do what it takes. I'll stay up late if I see value in it. I'll work a second job if there's value in it. I'll go out my way if I can find value in what I'm trying to accomplish. I'll do whatever it takes. This woman didn't have to do it, but she saw some value in giving that made her choose to still sacrifice. Yeah. Where do you place your value? If you go throughout your life and think about the sacrifices you're currently making, it will reveal to all of us what you find value in. If you're not willing to sacrifice something, you don't really think much of that thing. You're not only not committed to it, but you don't see much value in it. She did it because for her, there was value in giving. She placed a high value in it. So when you choose sacrifice, it says what you're committed to. It signifies what you believe is worth it. When you choose to sacrifice, thirdly, you cannot be overcome with the thoughts about what you're giving up. Let me say that again. Here it is. When you choose to sacrifice, you cannot be overcome with the thoughts about what you are giving up. Watch what Jesus says about her. She's poor. She's a widow. And Jesus said she's giving out of her poverty. She doesn't have much to give, but she's willing to give it. But I believe the only reason she makes it all the way to the temple and gets to the offering basket is simply because she did not become overcome with the thoughts about what she's giving up. Imagine the scene. I don't know what her living conditions are. She's poor. She's in poverty, so her living conditions probably are not the best. But she left where she was, and she began this journey to the temple. And each and every step, she could have turned back, but yet she kept going each and every step. Maybe she began to think about, what I could possibly do with this money. Maybe she began to think about, what am I going to eat this week? Maybe she could have begun to think about all the things that she could do with what she had. Maybe she's like, man, if I hold on to it, maybe I can flip it and have it some more. But no, she doesn't become overwhelmed about the thoughts of what she's giving up, and she makes it there, puts her money in it because she's not consumed with these thoughts. And that's one of the greatest tricks of the enemy. The greatest trick of the enemy, one of them is simply that will make you overthink your sacrifice. Why am I sacrificing? No one else is. Why am I sacrificing? Do you know what I could be doing with my time? Do you know what I could be doing with this money? Why do I have to go through this sacrifice? There are other people who make sacrifices and they're not doing any better than I am. So why do I have to sacrifice? You have to be careful, because if you allow the enemy to consume your thoughts about what you're giving up, it'll keep you from making the sacrifice. I know at times you have to give up a lot, but guess what? You have to see it's worth it. I know at times it seems like I have to give up more than other people, but guess what? At the end of the day, it's worth it. I know at times what you have to give up, here it is. It may hurt, but I have to still be willing to choose to make the sacrifice. It may be difficult, but you have to learn how to give things up. That's how you prevent being consumed by the thoughts about what you're giving up. It's when you make the decision to give something up, you have to learn to let it go. Because sometimes we decide to give something up, but we put it right behind us. And when we put it right behind it, it's convenient for us because it's always there to remind us of what I gave up. That's why even in certain relationships, when you give certain people up, you need to let them go, because if you don't let them go, they'll be constantly in your presence, constantly reminding you of the sacrifice you made or what you possibly gave up. And in our life, when we decide to give something up, you got to begin to let it go, meaning create a distance between that thing and you, because if you don't, you'll just keep thinking about it over and over and over and over and over and over again. Y'all have heard the stories of me shopping, whether it's for flights or hotel rooms. Y'all know at the end of my journey, I'm gonna have 30 tabs up, because I've gone to every website price comparing everything. And then I finally sometimes decide, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and buy this flight. I don't know if it's the best decision, but I'm going to go ahead and buy this flight. But then I keep the other tabs open because, You know, in my mind, I still got 24 hours to cancel the flight that I booked yesterday without penalty. So I keep the tab open just in case I want to go back and rethink it. And often that's where we get caught in between the decision we need to make and rethinking the decision we need to make. And we get caught in between because we keep going back, rethinking things over and over and over. And guess what? Over time, things pass you by. Why? Because you're in a position of rethinking things over and over and over again. At this point, you could have made the sacrifice, gotten it back, and moved on. But no, you're caught in between of rethinking what you might be possibly giving up and rethinking of what you may be losing out on, rethinking on what you could have gotten if you chose something else. You're rethinking these things over and over, and it will keep you from making the choice to sacrifice the things you need to make. I wish we knew more about her. I wish we knew what her mindset was as she made her journey to the temple to make this sacrifice. But it suggests to us the reason she didn't overcome with her thoughts is because she was committed to giving and she thought it was valuable. Also, you know, when you choose sacrifice, I can't be concerned about the opinions of others. Now, why would she do that? Maybe if we use our spiritual imagination, as she's journeying to the temple, she encountered one of her friends. Girl, where you going? Oh, I'm going to give my offering. Offering? You ain't got no money for offering? Girl, you were just at my house the other day eating on my table because you couldn't afford nothing. How you giving offering? But yet she gave. Jesus paints this picture because he talks about the rich people. The rich people are doing it in a way where people can see them giving. These containers in which they are giving in, they're made of brass. So because they're made of brass, when the rich people give, it makes a whole lot of noise. It makes a whole lot of noise because they're dropping these metal coins into this brass thing. So they're pouring their offering into these things, making all of this noise. And every time people hear it fall, I believe people begin to look because, oh, that was loud. Who gave over there? But she's not concerned about what other people think. She's not concerned about other people's opinion of her sacrifice, and she refuses to allow people to talk her out of making the choice to make the sacrifice because somebody always thinks they know better for you. Somebody will always try to talk you out of what God has called you to sacrifice. Someone will always say you don't have to do all that, but you cannot be worried about or concerned about the opinions of others. She was a widow, and she gave knowing she didn't have anything else. I remember this was before I convinced Ernisha to marry me or even like me. I wanted to become more of a giver, so I gave strategically. Y'all don't talk about me. Y'all don't judge me. Confession good for the soul, bad for the reputation. This was before churches had all them check running machines. So I would want to give, so I give with a check. But the reason I gave with a check is because I could give it, and I knew the next time I would get paid, and I figured I would get paid before the church cash or deposited my check. So watch this. I gave knowing that there was more coming. So I didn't mind writing the check because I knew it was more coming. Now, I just had to pray that what I thought was coming came on time before the deacons would have to call Minister Kennebrew, we got a check here. Trust me, I done graduated from that. But here, I gave knowing something more was coming. She gave not knowing if anything else was coming. And I'm sure there were people who had something to say about that. How dare you keep giving that church or giving your money to the temple? You can't afford that. Everybody has an opinion about what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, but she isn't worried about that. She doesn't know what's coming next. She doesn't know if she will have anything for this week to come, but she is still willing to make the sacrifice. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices in silence. Ooh, that's good. I wish that was in my notes and I had it on the slide. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices in silence. What do I mean? Because there may be people around you who will not understand the sacrifice you're making. There may be people around you who can't make sense of why you would make that decision. There may be people around you who will begin to talk you out of it. Why are you doing that for them? You remember how they did you, but yet you still would do that for them? Why you go out your way? Why you do this? They don't recognize you. They don't acknowledge you. And that's why sometimes you have to make sacrifices in silence. And sometimes the sacrifice I make is between me and God. Because I may not be able to handle the opinions of others. Let me give you one more. When I choose to sacrifice, let me quantify this one. When I choose to sacrifice for the things of God, God always notices. Watch what Jesus says. Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty. Jesus is watching her. Jesus is commending her. Because Jesus notices the sacrifice she's making. I don't know how Jesus knew her background. Maybe it's somebody he encountered along the way of his ministry, or maybe it was just his divine insight, who knew that she was a widow, who knew that she was giving her out of her poverty, who knew she was giving all that she had. I don't know how Jesus knew this, but I know Jesus noticed. And I believe that teaches us whenever we sacrifice for the things of God, God always notices. One thing about God being all-knowing, God knows and examines all of our choices. And sacrifice is what is often required of God. But whenever God calls me to sacrifice something, I have to know that I know it's worth it. Because whenever God calls me to sacrifice anything, I know it has to do with something bigger and greater than me. And what matters to God is how we do what we do. Meaning I have to make the sacrifice, and I give and I serve with the right heart and with the right mind. And when I choose to do it the right way, God notices. Sometimes I wish in the biblical narrative we could find out what happened next. I just believe Jesus didn't just notice what she was doing. And Jalen, we can rock. Jesus didn't just notice what she was doing. But I'm crazy enough to believe that the Jesus and the God that I serve made sure she was taken care of. I'm crazy enough to believe that this poor woman who gave out her poverty, when she gave all that she had, A day or so later, she realized she actually had more than she thought she had. And because somehow God continued to bless her because she was willing to give regardless of what it took, regardless of what it looks like. And it teaches us a valuable lesson. God always notices when you sacrifice. God shows when you make up in your mind that, God, if this is what you want me to do, I'm willing to do it. God sees what you gave up. God sees what you had to walk away from. God sees the work that you are doing. God sees it. And I believe whenever we sacrifice for the things of God, God always honors us. We talk about it all the time. I hope that when I say many times, I pray you experience the peace, the blessings, the favor, and the increase of God. Often that's the result of your willingness to make a sacrifice. Because God noticed how you served. God noticed what you did. God noticed how you went out your way. God notices how you bit your tongue, even though you know you had a good comeback. God noticed how you show love to the one who hurt you. God noticed all these things. And God doesn't just notice those things. God begins to honor us for those things. So we begin to experience God's love. We experience God's joy. We experience God's favor. Why? Because we are willing to make a sacrifice. And in our life, we got to ask ourselves, what are you willing to sacrifice for? What are you willing to give up for the things of God? What are you willing to give up for what God has for you? What are you willing to sacrifice for your family? What are you willing to sacrifice for the sake of your relationship? What are you willing to sacrifice for the sake of your career? You have to ask yourself these questions. And the beauty of it is we have a perfect example in Jesus. Jesus, who was willing to sacrifice. Jesus paid a debt he didn't owe. Jesus laid down his life. He didn't have to do it, but Jesus was willing to make the sacrifice that he made of his life on the cross because he thought each and every one of us was worth it. He thought each and every one of us had value. And even as they mocked him, he stayed on the cross and continued to make that sacrifice for us. And the scripture says he died, but he rose and he ascended, and he is now sitting on the right hand of the Father because God elevated him for his willingness to choose sacrifice. I honestly don't know. I don't have the prophetic gift like that to tell you what you need to sacrifice, but I don't need it because you already know. There may be something in your life God has been calling you to sacrifice. God has been calling you to give up. Today, I'm just here to tell you, when you choose sacrifice, especially for the things of God, God will notice. Let's pray.
Hey, I just want to say thank you again for joining us this morning in the Freedom Fellowship Virtual Sanctuary. I pray you were blessed by this service and by this message. And I also want to remind you, you can always join us live and in person every Sunday at 2:00 p.m. at 163 Ponce De Leon Avenue, Northeast, right here in Atlanta, Georgia. And as we prepare to go, I want to give you an opportunity to give. Here at Freedom, we believe that whenever we give, it's an opportunity to honor God. It's an opportunity to partner with God, and it's an opportunity to experience the generosity of God's grace. There on the bottom of the screen, you can see multiple ways to give. And we ask and we encourage you to give cheerfully, joyfully, give abundantly. Why? Because that's how God has given to each and every one of us. And when you give, you enable freedom. Continue to fulfill the mission and the vision that God has given uniquely to our church. So I want to thank you in advance for your giving. Again, right there on the screen, there are ways that you can give. And as you're finishing up your giving this morning, I want to leave you with this benediction. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face smile upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift the light of his countenance upon you and grant you his peace. May the Lord bless you when you rise up early and when you settle late, in your labor and in your leisure, in your laughter and even in your tears, until that very day where we should all sit around the feet of Jesus, where there's no sunrise nor sunset. Now go and